First Class Airways Flight 447 touched down at Houston's International Airport with a gentle thud. In the first-class cabin, a black woman in an elegant gray suit stood up, her eyes cold as ice, staring toward the flight attendant station. She knew that the past 30 minutes had changed everything forever. They had laughed at her, mocked her, dismissed her complaints like she was nobody. What they didn't know was that starting Monday morning, she would be the one deciding their futures. And now, everything was about to change. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and transformation, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from New York, Los Angeles, London, or somewhere else entirely? Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal respect regardless of their skin color. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, this story will leave you speechless. Now let's rewind and see exactly how we got here. The morning sun barely crept over the Atlanta skyline when Loretta Washington sat in her temporary office staring at the email that would change her life. The subject line read, Board Confirmation CEO, Appointment Effective March 18th. 42 years of climbing fighting, proving herself over and over again, had led to this moment. She was about to become the chief executive officer of First Class Airways, one of the largest airlines in the country. But this Friday, March 15th, was still hers. Still anonymous. Still free to see the truth nobody wanted her to see. Loretta had earned her MBA from Wharton at the top of her class, spent 18 years in the aviation industry fighting through every barrier imaginable, and most recently served as executive vice president at Sky Elite First Class's biggest competitor. The board had hired her specifically to fix what they delicately called service culture issues. Customer complaints had skyrocketed. Satisfaction ratings plummeted. Market share evaporated. They needed someone who could transform the company from the inside out. What they got was someone who understood exactly what was broken because she had lived it her entire career. Loretta closed her laptop and made a decision that would become legendary in aviation circles. She would fly First Class Airways today, completely anonymous, booking a ticket under her name but revealing nothing about her new position. She wanted to experience what real passengers experienced, particularly passengers who looked like her. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing a tailored charcoal vest over a crisp white blouse, her natural hair pulled back in an elegant twist, carrying a leather handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But she deliberately booked economy class, planning to upgrade with frequent flyer miles at the airport. She wanted to see how they treated someone who earned their way up, not someone who flashed a corporate card. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport took 30 minutes through early morning traffic. Loretta felt her stomach tighten with anticipation, though she kept her face calm, professional. She had learned long ago never to show emotion in situations where people were looking for reasons to doubt her. At the check-in counter, a middle-aged white woman named Brenda processed passengers with mechanical efficiency. When Loretta approached and requested an upgrade to first class using her accumulated points, Brenda's entire demeanor shifted. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She typed slowly on her keyboard, then looked up with barely concealed suspicion. "Are you sure these points belong to you, ma'am?" The question hung in the air, like poison. Loretta had heard variations of it 1,000 times. The assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly have earned premium status legitimately. That she must have borrowed someone's account, or worse, stolen it. Loretta smiled with practiced grace, her voice steady and warm despite the anger simmering underneath. "Yes, I'm quite sure. I've been flying extensively for work." "Would you like to see my identification?" Brenda took longer than necessary to verify everything, clicking through screens with exaggerated slowness while the line behind Loretta grew. Finally, reluctantly, she printed the new boarding pass. Gate B-17. Boarding starts in 45 minutes. No smile, no have a nice flight. Just the bare minimum required by her job description. Loretta walked toward security, her mind already cataloging the interaction. First, data point bias starts at check-in. She moved through the pre-check line quickly, her status earned through countless business trips, and made her way to the first-class lounge. The space was elegant, filled with comfortable leather chairs, a buffet of fresh fruit and pastries, and a bar serving top-shelf liquor at 10 in the morning. A few business travelers in expensive suits scattered throughout most of them, white men hunched over laptops or barking into phones about quarterly earnings and merger deals. Loretta found a quiet corner, pulled out her iPad, and began reviewing internal documents about first-class airways that the board had sent her. Customer satisfaction scores, employee retention rates, incident reports. The picture they painted was uglier than she had imagined. Dozens of complaints specifically mentioned discriminatory treatment. Flight attendants who were rude to passengers of color but sweet to white customers. Suspicious security checks. Denied services. The pattern was clear, systematic, and completely unacceptable. But Loretta knew that data on a spreadsheet never told the whole story. She needed to experience it herself. She needed to feel what her future customers felt every single day. When the boarding announcement echoed through the lounge, Loretta gathered her belongings and walked to gate B17. The gate agent, a young man with carefully styled hair and a bright smile, checked her boarding pass with professional courtesy. "Good morning, Miss Washington. Welcome to first class. You'll be in seat 2A today. Enjoy your flight." Finally, someone treating her like she belonged. But Loretta knew the real test was still ahead. She walked down the jetway, her heels clicking against the metal floor, her heart beating just a bit faster than normal. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner gleamed with that new plane smell, all polished surfaces and ambient lighting designed to soothe nervous travelers. Loretta stepped into the first-class cabin and immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. Spacious leather seats, plenty of legroom, soft music playing overhead. This was the experience people paid premium prices for, the experience she had earned with her miles and her money. She found seat 2A by the window and settled in, placing her handbag in the compartment beneath the seat in front of her and pulling out her iPad. She was just another passenger now. Just another woman trying to get from Atlanta to Houston. Except she wasn't, and very soon everyone on this plane would learn exactly who she was. The man who approached Loretta wore the crisp uniform of a senior flight attendant, his name tag reading Ashton Palmer Purser. He was white, probably mid-30s, with the kind of confidence that came from 12 years of telling people what to do at 30,000 feet. Ashton stopped at row 2, glanced at his tablet, then looked directly at Loretta with an expression that made her stomach clench. "Excuse me, may I see your boarding pass?" His tone wasn't quite rude, but it wasn't warm either. It was the voice of someone performing a duty they found mildly distasteful. Loretta handed over the boarding pass without comment, watching his face carefully. Ashton examined it with unnecessary thoroughness, comparing the seat number to his tablet twice, then looking back at Loretta as if expecting her to magically transform into someone else. "This seat is for first-class passengers. Are you sure you're in the right section?" There it was. The assumption, the doubt, the thinly veiled suggestion that she didn't belong here. Loretta kept her voice calm and leveled the voice she had perfected over years of dealing with people who questioned her presence in rooms where she had every right to be. "Yes, I upgraded, using my frequent flyer miles. Everything should be in order." Ashton's lips pressed into a thin line. He tapped his tablet a few more times, clearly hoping to find some error that would justify his suspicion. When he found nothing, he gave a curt nod and walked away without another word. No apology for the inconvenience. No acknowledgement that his question had been insulting. Just silence and the faint air of disappointment that he hadn't caught her in some imagined deception. Loretta exhaled slowly, pulling out her phone and opening a note. She typed, "Ashton Palmer Purser. Questioned my right to first-class seat despite valid boarding pass. Assumption of fraud or error based on appearance. First incident documented." A few minutes later, a man in an expensive Navy suit settled into seat 2B beside her. Stanford Brooks looked exactly like what he was, a wealthy executive accustomed to being catered to. His silver hair, perfectly styled, his Rolex catching the overhead lights as he adjusted his seatbelt. Stanford glanced at Loretta, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or displeasure. He looked around the cabin as if searching for an escape route, then caught Ashton's eye. Excuse me, is this the only seat available in first class? Stanford's voice carried the entitled tone of someone who had never been told no in his life. Ashton approached immediately, his demeanor completely different now. Warm, deferential, eager to please. Yes, sir, we're completely full today. I apologize for any inconvenience. Stanford sighed dramatically and sat down, making a show of arranging his belongings. He pulled a large leather briefcase from his shoulder and opened the overhead compartment directly above their row. Instead of sharing the space, he positioned his bag to take up the entire bin, then added his suit jacket on top, effectively blocking Loretta from storing anything there. Loretta waited until he finished, then spoke politely. Excuse me, could you make some room? I need to store my bag. Stanford looked at her as if she had spoken a foreign language. He pulled out wireless earbuds, inserted them with exaggerated care, and turned his attention to his phone, completely ignoring her request. Loretta felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, the kind that came from being treated as invisible as less than human. But she refused to make a scene. Not yet. Not when she was still gathering evidence. She bent down and placed her bag under the seat in front of her, sacrificing precious legroom because a man who had more than enough space decided she wasn't worth basic courtesy. She made another note on her phone. Passenger in seat 2B Stanford Brooks refused to share overhead bin space, ignored direct request for accommodation. The plane began to fill. Other first-class passengers boarded, mostly white, mostly male, mostly dressed in business attire that screamed money and status. The flight attendants greeted them with bright smiles and helpful hands, storing bags, offering champagne before takeoff, making small talk about weather and destinations. When they passed Loretta's row, the warmth evaporated. Their eyes slid over her like she was part of the upholstery, unremarkable and unworthy of attention. No offer of pre-departure drinks. No warm welcome. Just professional emptiness. Loretta observed it all with the careful attention of someone who had been studying this particular form of discrimination for 4 decades. She knew exactly what was happening. She had felt it in job interviews where she was twice as qualified as the white candidate who got hired. She had experienced it in meetings where her ideas were ignored until a male colleague repeated them verbatim and received applause. She had lived it on countless flights, in countless hotels, in countless restaurants where she was treated with suspicion until she proved over and over again that she belonged. But this time was different. This time she had the power to do something about it. She just had to wait a little longer, just had to endure a little more. And then, when the moment was right, she would show them exactly who they had been dealing with. The plane's engines roared to life. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom with the standard welcome and flight information. Loretta fastened her seatbelt and stared out the window as Atlanta fell away beneath them, the city shrinking to a grid of lights and roads. She was flying into a storm of her own making, and there was no turning back now. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin settled into the comfortable rhythm of cruising altitude. Loretta was reviewing a report on her iPad when a flight attendant appeared with the beverage cart. Jolene Carter was young, probably late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun and the kind of smile that looked painted on. She stopped at Stanford's seat first, and the transformation was remarkable. Her entire face lit up with genuine warmth, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get you to drink? We have champagne, red wine, white wine, whiskey, or any cocktail you'd like. I can make you something special if you have a preference." Stanford barely looked up from his phone. "I'll have a whiskey sour top shelf." Jolene beamed at him like he had just recited poetry. "Of course, sir. Coming right up." She turned to her preparation area and carefully mixed the drink, measuring each ingredient with precision, adding fresh ice, garnishing it with a perfect twist of lemon. She placed it on a cocktail napkin and handed it to Stanford with both hands, as if presenting a gift. "Here you are, sir. Please let me know if you need anything else at all." Then Jolene turned to Loretta, and the warmth drained from her face like someone had flipped a switch. Her smile vanished. Her eyes went flat. She didn't make eye contact. Drink. One word. Not even a complete sentence. No warmth, no options, no courtesy. Just a single word delivered with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a tax form. Loretta kept her voice pleasant, refusing to match the rudeness with rudeness of her own. "I'd like a glass of champagne, please." Jolene reached for the cheapest bottle on her cart, not the premium champagne offered to first-class passengers, and poured it carelessly into a plastic cup rather than a proper flute glass. The liquid sloshed over the rim, spilling onto the tray. She shoved the cup toward Loretta without a napkin, without a word, without even a glance. Loretta looked at the cup, then at Stanford's perfectly crafted cocktail in its crystal glass, then back at Jolene. The difference was impossible to ignore. She spoke calmly, her tone still polite, despite the fury building inside her. "Excuse me, is it possible to have the champagne in a proper flute glass? This seems like the standard service." Jolene's eyes narrowed. For the first time, she looked directly at Loretta, and her expression was pure contempt. "That's what we serve." The words were clipped dismissive. Loretta felt every pair of eyes in first class turn toward their row. She could feel the judgment, the assumption that she was being difficult, demanding, uppity. She pushed forward anyway. "But the gentleman next to me received a different level of service. I'm simply asking for the same courtesy." Jolene's face flushed red. "He ordered a cocktail. You ordered champagne. That's the difference." It was a lie, and they both knew it. First-class passengers receive drinks in proper glassware regardless of what they ordered. It was literally in the service manual. But Jolene stood her ground, daring Loretta to challenge her further. Stanford chose that moment to interject his voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Some people just don't understand how things work." He said it to no one in particular, but the message was clear. The problem wasn't the discriminatory service. The problem was Loretta for having the audacity to point it out. A woman seated 2 rows back, an older white woman with pearls and perfect silver hair that Loretta would later learn was named Francine Dixon, leaned forward with a condescending smile. "Dear, you should be grateful you're even in first class. Not everyone gets this opportunity." The implication hung heavy in the air. "You should be thankful we let you sit here at all. You should accept whatever scraps we throw you and keep your mouth shut." Loretta's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the plastic cup of cheap champagne. She took a sip, forcing herself to swallow the bitter taste, along with the even more bitter reality that in 2024, this was still what Black passengers faced. She pulled out her phone and added to her notes, "Jolene Carter, flight attendant, discriminatory beverage service. Provided substandard drink in improper container while offering premium service to white passenger in adjacent seat. Dismissive and hostile when questioned." An hour later, Jolene returned with the meal service cart. Once again, she approached Stanford, first with a dazzling smile. "Sir, today we have grilled salmon with asparagus or filet mignon with truffle mashed potatoes. Which would you prefer?" Stanford considered the options as if choosing wine for a royal dinner. "I'll take the filet medium rare." Jolene nodded eagerly. "Excellent choice, sir." She retrieved the meal, arranged it carefully on his tray table, made sure his silverware was perfectly aligned, and even folded his napkin with a flourish. "Enjoy your meal, sir. I'll be back to check on you shortly." Then she turned to Loretta with dead eyes and a voice like ice. "Chicken or pasta?" Loretta blinked. "I was told first class has salmon and filet mignon." Jolene's jaw tightened. "Those ran out. You have chicken or pasta." Loretta glanced at the cart, which was still 3/4 full. She could see at least 2 more filet mignon meals wrapped in their distinctive gold foil. She looked back at Jolene, who stared at her with open hostility, daring her to make an issue of it. "But you just offered it to him." Loretta gestured toward Stanford. Jolene's smile was poisonous. "First come, first served, ma'am. Would you like chicken or pasta?" The cabin had gone quiet. Other passengers were watching, now some with sympathy, most with irritation that this woman was causing a disruption to their peaceful flight. Loretta reached up and pressed the call button. Within seconds, Ashton appeared, his expression already annoyed before he even heard the complaint. "Yes, how can I help you?" Loretta explained, calmly laying out the facts. The different beverage service. The meal options that mysteriously ran out only for her. the pattern of disrespect that had defined her entire flight experience. Ashton listened with his arms crossed, his face growing harder with each word. When she finished, he didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing. Instead, he cut her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, we treat all passengers equally. Perhaps you're just not familiar with first-class service. Sometimes there are variations in what we can offer based on availability and timing." Loretta's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath now. "I fly first class regularly with multiple airlines. This is not about familiarity. This is discrimination." Ashton's eyes flashed. "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." Loretta hadn't raised her voice. She had spoken at a normal conversational volume, the same volume Stanford had used when he made his snide comment about her not understanding how things work. But now she was the problem. Now she was the disturbance. The narrative was already being written, and she was being cast as the villain in her own story of mistreatment. Loretta made one more attempt to resolve the situation through proper channels. She looked directly at Ashton, her voice calm but firm. "I'd like to speak with the captain or someone in authority about this treatment." Ashton's face flushed red. His professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the anger underneath. "The captain is busy flying the plane. I am the purser. I'm the highest authority in this cabin, and I've already addressed your concerns. If you continue to be disruptive, we'll have a problem." Loretta refused to back down. "Then I'll file a formal complaint with the airline when we land." Ashton's smile was cruel. "You're more than welcome to do that, ma'am. I'm sure they'll give it all the attention it deserves." The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. He clearly believed nothing would come of her complaint, that she was just another angry passenger who would write a bad review online that nobody would read or care about. Stanford, who had been listening while eating his perfectly cooked filet mignon, decided to add his own commentary. He swiveled in his seat to face Loretta directly, his expression a mix of annoyance and condescension. "Listen, lady, you're making a scene over nothing. You got your seat, you got your meal. What more do you want? Attention, special treatment." Each word landed like a slap. Loretta met his eyes steadily. "I want to be treated with the same respect as any other paying passenger." "That's not special treatment. That's basic human dignity," Stanford snorted. "Maybe you should stick to economy if you can't handle first class. Some people just aren't cut out for it." The implication was clear. Some people meant black people. People like her. People who didn't belong in spaces reserved for people like him. Loretta felt something crack inside her chest, the same crack she had felt 100 times before when faced with casual racism delivered with a smile. But she held herself together, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. At the back of the first-class cabin, Jolene stood with another flight attendant, a man named Brock Henderson, and they weren't even trying to hide their mockery. Brock spoke just loud enough for Loretta to hear. "Some people just don't belong here." Jolene giggled a sound like breaking glass. "I know, right. She probably used someone else's miles, or bought them on some sketchy website." They laughed together, two people bonded by their shared belief that Loretta was somehow less than, somehow undeserving, somehow fundamentally different from the passengers they actually respected. Loretta pulled out her phone and began typing notes again. Names, direct quotes, timestamps. She documented everything with the precision of someone who knew that memories fade, but written records last forever. Ashton noticed her typing and strode back to her seat. "Excuse me, you're not allowed to photograph crew members without permission." Loretta didn't look up. "I'm not taking photos. I'm taking notes for my complaint." Ashton's voice rose slightly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your phone away now." Loretta finally looked up at him, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "I have the right to document my experience. I'm not violating any regulations. Now, here's where I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated unfairly, but nobody believed you? Where speaking up only made things worse? If you think Loretta is absolutely right to document what's happening to her, go ahead and comment. Number 1, right now. And if you believe she should have just stayed quiet to avoid confrontation, I want to hear your perspective too. Drop your thoughts in the comments because this conversation matters. Also, smash that like button if you're invested in this story, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Do you think Ashton will back down, or is this situation about to get even worse for Loretta? Let's find out. Ashton called 2 other male flight attendants to the front of the cabin. They flanked him like enforcers, their presence designed to intimidate. Ashton's voice was loud, now performing for the other passengers. "Ma'am, you're being disruptive. I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy class for the remainder of the flight." The words hit Loretta like a physical blow. On what grounds? Ashton crossed his arms. "Unruly passenger behavior. You're making other passengers uncomfortable with your complaints and confrontational attitude." Francine Dixon nodded vigorously from her seat. "Yes, she's been very loud and demanding." "I've been quite uncomfortable." Stanford added his voice to the chorus. "I second that. She's been nothing but trouble since we took off." Loretta looked around the cabin and saw her fate written in the faces staring back at her. Some looked uncomfortable, sympathetic even, but none of them spoke up. None of them defended her. Silence was easier than solidarity. Ashton took a step closer. "Ma'am, you can move voluntarily, or we will have security waiting when we land to remove you from the aircraft. The choice is yours." Loretta calculated her options in seconds. She could refuse and escalate this into a full incident that might involve law enforcement, creating a scene that would dominate the news cycle and overshadow everything else. Or she could comply, document everything, and handle this through proper channels when she had the power to do so. She chose the latter. She stood slowly gathering her belongings with as much dignity as she could muster. Her hands shook slightly, but her face remained calm. She pulled her bag from under the seat, straightened her suit jacket, and walked down the aisle toward economy class. As she passed Jolene and Brock, she heard Brock whisper, "Guess she learned her lesson." Jolene's reply was just as cruel. About time someone put her in her place. The economy cabin was a different world. Cramped seats, crying babies, the smell of recycled air and reheated food. A young flight attendant named Kimberly Ross, who couldn't have been more than 24 years old, was already waiting. She had heard from her colleagues about the difficult passenger being relocated, and her expression showed that she had already made up her mind about Loretta. Loretta was directed to seat 32D, a middle seat squeezed between a large man who overflowed into her space and a teenager with headphones blasting music loud enough to hear 3 rows away. She sat down, feeling the walls close and feeling the weight of humiliation settle over her like a blanket. But beneath the humiliation was something else, something cold and calculating, something that whispered, "Remember this. Remember every detail. Because very soon you're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else again." The next 2 hours crawled by like days. Loretta sat in her cramped middle seat, her knees pressed against the seat in front of her, her shoulders hunched to avoid touching the passengers on either side. This was the reality for millions of travelers she knew. People who couldn't afford the premium cabin, who endured discomfort as the price of getting from one place to another. She didn't judge them for flying economy. She judged the system that made dignity and respect something you had to pay extra for. Kimberly came by with the beverage cart, eventually her movements mechanical and cold. When she reached Loretta's row, she didn't make eye contact, didn't smile, didn't ask what she wanted with any warmth. She simply thrust a plastic cup of water at her without a word. No, please. No, thank you. No acknowledgement that Loretta was even human. Loretta accepted the water and said nothing. She was saving her words for when they would matter most. 2 rows back, a black woman in her late 50s watched the entire interaction with sad, knowing eyes. Her name was Geneva, and she had been a nurse for 35 years before retiring. She had seen Loretta escorted from first class and had recognized the scene playing out because she had lived versions of it herself countless times. During a lull in the service, Geneva made her way to the bathroom, and on the way back she paused by Loretta's seat and spoke softly. "Honey, I saw what happened up there. That was wrong." Loretta looked up and saw genuine compassion in Geneva's eyes, the first kindness she had received all flight. "Thank you," she said quietly. Geneva leaned in closer. "I've been flying for 40 years. Things haven't changed much. They see us and assume we don't belong. They see our skin and decide we're troublemakers, or thieves, or charity cases. It doesn't matter how much money we have, or how educated we are. To them, we're always suspect. Loretta felt tears prick at her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Instead, she smiled at Geneva, a real smile this time. Well, some things are about to change. Geneva looked puzzled, but smiled back. I hope so, dear. I truly do. She squeezed Loretta's shoulder and returned to her seat, leaving Loretta alone with her thoughts and her plans. A few minutes later, Ashton appeared in the economy cabin, making his way down the aisle with that self-satisfied expression of someone who believed he had successfully handled a problem. He stopped at Loretta's row and looked down at her with barely concealed smugness. I trust you're more comfortable here with your people. The pause before your people was deliberate, laden with meaning. He wanted her to know exactly what he thought of her, exactly where he believed she belonged. Loretta didn't respond. She simply looked at him with an expression so cold, so utterly devoid of fear or submission, that Ashton's smile faltered for just a second. Then he recovered, chuckled to himself, and walked away, leaning over to whisper something to Kimberly that made her laugh. Loretta pulled out her phone and connected to the aircraft Wi-Fi, paying the $15 without hesitation. She opened her email and composed a message to Simone, her executive assistant, who was already working at the First Class Airways headquarters preparing for Loretta's official start date on Monday. The email was brief and precise. Simone, I need you to pull the personnel files for the following crew members on Flight 447 today. Ashton Palmer, Jolene Carter, Brock Henderson, Kimberly Ross. Also need full audio and video recordings from cabin if available per company policy. Send to my private email. Urgent. Do not mention this to anyone. L.W. She hit send and watched the message disappear into the digital ether. Then she composed a second email, this one to the Human Resources Department. Schedule a meeting with me first thing Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. Topic: In-flight service standards and crew conduct review. Mandatory attendance from all department heads. Loretta Washington, incoming CEO. As she typed, Loretta allowed her mind to wander back through the years of similar indignities. The time she was passed over for a promotion, despite having better performance metrics than anyone in her division, only to watch them give the position to a white man with half her experience. The time a colleague told her to her face that she only got hired because of diversity quotas, as if her Harvard degree and 15 years of expertise meant nothing compared to the color of her skin. The time a client refused to meet with her because they wanted someone more experienced, which was code for someone who didn't look like her. She had swallowed each insult, each slight, each moment of being made to feel less than. She had smiled and worked twice as hard and proven herself over and over until even her harshest critics couldn't deny her competence. And now finally she had climbed high enough that she could do more than just survive. She could change the system itself. The plane began its descent into Houston. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, collecting trash and checking seatbacks. When Kimberly reached Loretta's row, she snatched the plastic cup from Loretta's tray table without a word and moved on. Loretta barely noticed. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead, planning the meetings she would hold, the policies she would implement, the message she would send to every single employee of First Class Airways that discrimination would no longer be tolerated, ignored, or excused. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump. The plane taxied to the gate, and Loretta Washington prepared to step off this aircraft and into her new role as the most powerful person in the company. The crew had no idea what was waiting for them, but they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. As the plane pulled up to gate C-23 at Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, Loretta noticed something unusual through her window. A small group of people in business attire stood near the jetway entrance, clearly waiting for someone. Among them, she recognized Simone, her assistant, looking professional and composed as always. Next to her stood Maxwell Bryant, the Director of Human Resources, a distinguished black man in his early 50s whose reputation for fairness and integrity had impressed Loretta during the interview process. Two airport security personnel flanked them, looking official and serious. Loretta felt a grim satisfaction settle in her chest. Simone had moved quickly. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the usual scramble for overhead bins. In first class, Ashton positioned himself at the forward door, preparing to give his standard farewell spiel to deplaning passengers. He was in the middle of checking his appearance in the reflective surface of the galley cabinet when he noticed the group waiting at the gate. His brow furrowed slightly, but he assumed they must be meeting some VIP passenger. He certainly didn't connect their presence to the woman he had banished to economy. Stanford Brooks was one of the first off the plane, strutting past Ashton with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for anything in his life. He paused when he reached Loretta's row in economy and looked down at her with a satisfied smirk.
"I hope you learned something today."
Loretta looked up at him and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret, someone who saw the future while others remained blind to it. Stanford frowned, unsettled by her expression, but moved on without another word. As passengers filed off, Ashton finally stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jetway, ready to head to the crew lounge and forget about this irritating flight. That's when Maxwell approached him with a serious expression. "Mr. Palmer, I need you and your crew to remain on board. We have a situation to discuss." Ashton's confusion was evident. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Maxwell pulled out his company identification. "Maxwell Bryant, Director of Human Resources, First Class Airways. This is official company business." The color drained from Ashton's face. Is there a problem?" Maxwell's expression remained neutral. "We'll discuss that in a moment." "Please gather your full crew in the forward galley." Now, Ashton's mind raced, trying to figure out what could possibly warrant this level of response. He glanced back into the plane and saw Jolene and Brock watching nervously from the galley. He motioned for them to stay put, then looked out toward the gate area where Loretta was stepping off the aircraft. Simone greeted her immediately with a warm, professional smile. "Welcome to Houston, Miss Washington. Your car is waiting. I've prepared everything you requested." Ashton froze. "Miss Washington," the woman from seat 2A, the difficult passenger he had relocated to economy. Why was the Director of Human Resources assistant treating her like she was someone important? Jolene appeared at his elbow, her voice tight with anxiety. "What's going on? Why is HR here?" Ashton watched as Loretta spoke briefly with Maxwell, who nodded respectfully and took notes on his tablet. "I don't know," Ashton said slowly, "but this doesn't look good." Loretta walked past them toward the terminal, her head held high, her bearing regal, despite the indignities she had endured. She didn't look at the crew, didn't acknowledge them. She simply left, followed by Simone, leaving Maxwell and the security personnel to deal with what came next. Maxwell boarded the aircraft and gestured for all the flight crew to assemble in the galley. Ashton, Jolene, Brock, Kimberly, and 3 other attendants crowded into the small space, their faces showing varying degrees of confusion and worry. Maxwell stood before them with his tablet in hand, his expression grave. "I received a report about an incident on this flight involving discriminatory treatment of a passenger. I need each of you to give me your account of what happened." Ashton immediately went into defensive mode, his voice taking on an authoritative tone. There was a disruptive passenger in first class who was making unreasonable demands and disturbing other passengers. I made the decision to relocate her to economy for everyone's safety and comfort. It was standard protocol. Jolene nodded vigorously. "That's correct. She was very aggressive and loud. We had multiple complaints from other passengers." Brock chimed in, "We handled it by the book. Sometimes you get passengers who just can't accept the service standards and create problems." Maxwell listened without interrupting his face, revealing nothing. When they finished, he tapped his tablet and turned it toward them. "I have the audio recordings from the cabin. Company policy requires all first-class cabins to record audio for quality assurance and security purposes. Let's listen." He pressed play. The crew heard Jolene's voice flat and cold, drank, then her warm, enthusiastic tone with Stanford. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get you to drink? We have champagne, red wine, white wine, whiskey, or any cocktail you'd like." The contrast was undeniable. Jolene's face went pale. Maxwell played another clip, Ashton's voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps you're just not familiar with first-class service. Then Brock and Jolene laughing in the background. Some people just don't belong here. I know, right? She probably used someone else's miles. The galley was silent, except for the damning audio evidence of their own voices. Ashton tried to recover. That's out of context. You don't understand the full situation. Maxwell's voice cut through the excuses like a blade. Is it? Because it sounds very clear to me. You treated a paying first-class passenger with disrespect and bias based on her race. Jolene's voice shook. We didn't. I mean, it wasn't about race. Maxwell pulled up another screen on his tablet. Then explain to me why you offered the first-class meal options to Mr. Brooks, but told Miss Washington they were unavailable, when in fact 3 portions of each were still in the galley. I have the inventory records right here. The meals were there. You chose not to offer them to her. The silence that followed was absolute. Ashton's hands trembled. Look, I don't know who this woman is, but she can't just file a complaint and have us interrogated like criminals. Maxwell's pause was deliberate, letting the tension build. The woman you removed from first class, the woman you mocked and humiliated, is Loretta Washington. The crew stared at him blankly. Jolene found her voice first. So who is she? Maxwell's next words fell like a guillotine blade. As of Monday morning, she is the new Chief Executive Officer of First Class Airways. Your boss, my boss, everyone's boss. The galley erupted in chaos. Jolene burst into tears, her carefully applied makeup running in black streaks down her face. Brock sank against the galley counter, all color draining from his features. Kimberly covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with horror. But it was Ashton who seemed to take the hardest hit. His mouth opened and closed several times before he could form words. That's impossible. That can't be right. Maxwell pulled up an email on his tablet and showed it to them. The official announcement from the board of directors, complete with Loretta's photograph and credentials. MBA from Wharton. 18 years in aviation. Former executive vice president of Sky Elite. Starting as CEO of First Class Airways effective Monday, March 18th. Ashton staggered backward. But if she had just told us who she was. Maxwell's voice turned sharp, cutting through the excuse before it could fully form. If she had identified herself, you would have treated her well. But that's exactly the problem. Every passenger deserves that treatment regardless of who they are or what they look like. That's the standard she's coming here to establish. And that's the standard you all failed to meet. Jolene was sobbing, now her words coming out in gasps. I didn't know. Oh my God, I didn't know. Brock tried a different approach, his voice pleading. This was just a misunderstanding. We can apologize. We can make this right. Maxwell shook his head slowly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern of discriminatory behavior that was deliberate, systematic, and cruel. Miss Washington didn't board this flight looking for a reason to fire people. She boarded this flight hoping to see that our service was as good as we claim it to be. Instead, she experienced racism, mockery, and humiliation from crew members who are supposed to represent this airline's values. He pulled up the audio again and played another clip. This time it was Ashton's voice speaking to Loretta in Economy. I trust you're more comfortable here with your people. The pause before your people was damning. Ashton's face went from pale to red. I didn't mean it like that. It was just, you were just revealing exactly what you think about black passengers. Maxwell finished coldly. You treated her as less than human because of the color of her skin. You denied her the service she paid for. And when she dared to speak up, you punished her by removing her from her seat and mocking her suffering. Kimberly, who had been silent until now, finally spoke in a trembling voice. I didn't know what had happened in first class. I just followed what the senior crew told me. They said she was a problem passenger. Maxwell's expression softened slightly when he looked at her. Which is why your situation is different, Miss Ross. You're young, you're new, and you followed the lead of your superiors. But you still participated in treating her poorly. You still made assumptions. You still have accountability here. He looked at each of them in turn.
Effective immediately, all of you are suspended pending a full investigation. You will not fly any routes until we've completed our review, and Miss Washington has made her decision about your employment.
You'll receive letters within 24 hours outlining the next steps in this process. Jolene fell to her knees, actually on her knees, on the galley floor. Please, I need this job. I have student loans. I have rent.
I can't lose this job. Please.
Ashton wasn't pleading. His shock had transformed into anger. This is ridiculous. We're being railroaded because someone got their feelings hurt.
We have rights. We have unions.
Maxwell's voice remained steady and professional. You absolutely have rights, and the union will be notified as per your contract. You'll have the opportunity to present your case.
But understand this, the evidence against you is extensive, well documented, and completely damning.
Miss Washington didn't just complain, she documented everything. Timestamps, direct quotes, names. She built a case that would hold up in any legal proceeding.
And she did it while enduring treatment that no passenger, no human being should ever have to endure. He gestured to the security personnel waiting at the aircraft door.
Please escort the crew off the plane and ensure they leave the secure area. Their security badges will be deactivated within the hour. As the crew was led off the aircraft, Jolene was still crying. Brock looked shell-shocked, and Ashton turned back one last time to look at Maxwell. She set us up. She came on this flight specifically to trap us. Maxwell's response was quiet but firm. No, Mr. Palmer. She came on this flight to see if her employees were treating passengers with dignity and respect. You trapped yourselves with your own behavior. She simply gave you the rope. You're the ones who chose to hang yourselves with it. The crew walked through the terminal in stunned silence, their uniforms suddenly feeling like prison jumpsuits. Other airline employees they passed looked at them curiously, sensing something was wrong but not knowing what. Within hours, word would spread through the entire company. The new CEO had flown anonymously and been treated so poorly that an entire crew was suspended on her first day. The message was already being received loud and clear. Things were about to change dramatically at First Class Airways. And anyone who thought they could continue discriminating against passengers with impunity was in for a very rude awakening. Monday morning arrived with the kind of bright, clear sunlight that seemed designed for new beginnings. Loretta Washington stepped out of her car at exactly 6:30 a.m. and looked up at the glass tower that housed First Class Airways headquarters. 40 floors of steel and ambition reaching toward the sky. This was hers now. Not to own, but to lead. Not to rule, but to transform. She walked through the lobby, her heels clicking against the polished marble, and smiled at the security guard who scrambled to attention when he recognized her from the memo that had gone out over the weekend announcing her arrival. Good morning, Miss Washington. Welcome. His enthusiasm was genuine, and Loretta made a note of his name tag. People who showed up early and did their jobs with pride deserve to be noticed. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt both endless and instantaneous. When the doors opened, Simone was waiting with a tablet full of schedules and a coffee made exactly how Loretta liked it. Good morning, Miss Washington. Your office is ready. Maxwell is already here with the files you requested, and the department heads are gathering in the boardroom. Loretta's office was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Houston. A massive desk made of reclaimed wood, shelves waiting to be filled with books and mementos. But Loretta barely glanced at any of it. She went straight to the conference table where Maxwell had laid out the personnel files and evidence from Flight 447. Audio recordings, video footage from the cabin cameras, complaint histories for each crew member, customer service ratings. It was all there, meticulously organized and damning in its completeness. At 7 a.m. precisely, Loretta walked into the boardroom where her new leadership team waited. Maxwell was there, along with Patricia Vaughn, the director of operations, a white woman in her 50s, who looked nervous. Leonard Hayes, the director of training, a Hispanic man in his 40s, sat with a legal pad ready. Several other department heads filled the remaining seats, all of them looking at Loretta with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and barely concealed anxiety. Loretta didn't waste time with pleasantries. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I want to address what happened on Flight 447 this past Friday, and more importantly, what it represents about our company culture. She nodded to Maxwell, who set up the video playback. For the next 20 minutes, the leadership team watched and listened to the entire incident unfold. The questioning of her boarding pass, the differential treatment in beverage service, the denied meal options, the mocking comments, the forced relocation to economy. When it was over, the room was silent. Patricia looked sick. This is absolutely unacceptable. I had no idea our crews were behaving this way. Loretta's voice was calm but firm. That's part of the problem. We've created a culture where this can happen invisibly. These crew members felt comfortable treating me that way because they've likely done it before without consequence. They've learned that discrimination is tolerated as long as it's subtle enough, as long as passengers don't make too much fuss, as long as it doesn't become a public relations problem. Leonard leaned forward. What do you want to do with the suspended crew members? Loretta had thought long and hard about this over the weekend. Ashton Palmer, Jolene Carter, and Brock Henderson are terminated, effective immediately. Their behavior was deliberate, malicious, and discriminatory. The evidence is overwhelming, and I won't have people like that representing this airline. She paused, then continued. However, Kimberly Ross and the other junior crew members will have a choice. They can attend a comprehensive anti-discrimination and customer service training program that we're going to develop, or they can resign. If they complete the program successfully and demonstrate real change, they can return to duty on probation. But one more incident, one more complaint, and they're done. Maxwell made notes. Patricia asked, what kind of timeline are we looking at for the training program? Loretta pulled out a document she had drafted over the weekend. I want it operational within 60 days. And it's not just for the suspended crew. It's for everyone. Every single employee of this airline, from baggage handlers to pilots to executives in this room, will go through mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training every quarter. No exceptions. She could see some of the executives shifting uncomfortably. I know this seems extreme. I know some people will resist. But here's what I learned from my experience on Friday. Discrimination isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's a tone of voice, a suspicious glance, a denied service. It's death by 1,000 small cuts. And we're going to train our people to recognize it in themselves and stop it before it happens. Loretta outlined her full plan. Mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds would fly regularly to assess service. A 24-hour hotline would be established for passengers to report discrimination investigated by an independent team that reported directly to her. Performance metrics would include not just efficiency and customer satisfaction scores, but also fairness and equity measures. Bonuses and promotions would be tied to these metrics. The company would commit to increasing diversity at all levels, particularly in management and leadership positions. And perhaps most importantly, there would be consequences. Real, meaningful consequences for discriminatory behavior. Patricia spoke carefully. These are significant changes. Some senior staff might resist. Some might even leave. Loretta's response was immediate and unwavering. Then they're welcome to find employment elsewhere. This is non-negotiable. We're going to become the industry leader in equitable service, or we're going to fail trying. I'd rather fail doing the right thing than succeed while perpetuating discrimination. After the meeting, Loretta returned to her office and placed a phone call. She had asked Simone to find contact information for Geneva, the kind woman from economy class who had offered comfort during her darkest moment on the flight. Geneva answered on the third ring, her voice warm but puzzled. Hello, Miss Geneva. This is Loretta Washington. We met on Flight 447 last Friday. There was a pause, then recognition. Oh yes, I remember you, dear. How are you? Loretta smiled. I'm well, and I wanted to thank you for your kindness. Your words meant more to me than you know. I also want you to know that what happened on that flight is leading to real change. And I'd like to offer you a lifetime gold status with our airline with all the benefits that entails. Additionally, I'd love for you to join our new Customer Advisory Board for Diversity and Inclusion. We need voices like yours to help us do better. Geneva was silent for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Are you serious? "You're really going to change things?" Loretta's voice was firm. "I'm really going to try. I can't promise it will be perfect, but I promise it will be better." "Will you help me?" Geneva laughed, a sound full of joy and hope. "Honey, I would be honored, truly honored." After they hung up, Loretta stood at her window and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Ashton was probably cleaning out his apartment, preparing for unemployment. Jolene was likely crying to friends about how unfair life was. Brock was maybe already updating his resume. But Loretta didn't feel vindictive satisfaction. She felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure that no other passenger, no other black woman or man or person of color would have to endure what she had endured. It was about building a company where dignity wasn't a luxury reserved for those with the right skin color or the right last name. It was about creating the change she had spent 42 years waiting for someone else to make. 3 months passed. Summer arrived in Houston with its oppressive heat and afternoon thunderstorms, but inside First Class Airways headquarters, a different kind of storm had swept through, one that transformed everything in its path. Ashton Palmer stood in his small apartment watching the local news. The anchor was cheerful as she reported First Class Airways has been named Airline of the Year by the American Travel Association, citing dramatic improvements in customer service and industry-leading diversity initiatives. CEO Loretta Washington accepted the award last night, dedicating it to passengers who have been mistreated and promising that her company will continue to set new standards for equity and inclusion in air travel. Ashton's jaw clenched as Loretta appeared on screen, poised and professional, speaking about vision and values and the importance of treating every passenger with dignity. He had applied to 17 airlines in the past 3 months. None would hire him. His termination for discriminatory conduct had followed him like a shadow, and in an industry where reputation mattered, he was toxic. He now worked retail at a department store, making a fraction of his former salary, watching his savings evaporate as he struggled to pay rent. Jolene Carter stood behind the register at a grocery store, scanning items with mechanical efficiency. A black family approached her lane, the mother helping her young daughter place items on the belt. The little girl looked up at her mom and said, "When I grow up, I want to be nice to everyone just like you taught me." The mother smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "That's right, baby. Always treat people with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. That's what makes you beautiful on the inside." Jolene felt shame wash over her so intensely that her hands shook. She rang up their groceries in silence, unable to meet their eyes, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When they left, she excused herself to the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes. She had learned her lesson, but it had come too late and cost too much. Brock Henderson was working construction, his soft flight attendant hands now calloused and sore. He rarely thought about that flight anymore, at least not during the day when physical labor kept his mind occupied. But at night, in those quiet moments before sleep, he sometimes heard his own voice mocking a woman who had done nothing wrong. He had been raised better than that. Somewhere along the way, he had let casual racism become comfortable, had let himself believe that people who looked different deserved less. He was paying for it now, but the real tragedy was all the people he had hurt before he finally faced consequences. Kimberly Ross, however, had made a different choice. She had enrolled in the training program. Loretta created a rigorous 8-week course that forced participants to confront their biases, learn the history of discrimination in America, and practice active allyship and inclusive service. She had cried through most of it, facing truths about herself that were painful to acknowledge, but she had persisted. She had listened to stories from passengers of color about their experiences. She had role-played difficult scenarios. She had learned to recognize the subtle ways bias manifests and how to actively counter it. When she completed the program and returned to flying, she was a different person. She went out of her way to provide excellent service to every single passenger, but she paid special attention to those who might typically be overlooked or mistreated. She reported colleagues who made discriminatory comments. She stood up for passengers who were being profiled or treated unfairly. And she became one of the highest-rated flight attendants in the entire airline, with passengers specifically requesting flights where she was working. Stanford Brooks, the businessman from seat 2B, continued flying first class regularly. He noticed the changes immediately. New training videos before every flight featuring Loretta, explaining the airline's commitment to equity. Diverse crew members at all levels. Service that was consistently excellent, regardless of the passenger's appearance. One day, he found himself seated next to a young black businessman who was clearly nervous about flying. Instead of ignoring him or looking for a different seat, Stanford found himself making conversation, offering tips about the best airport lounges, being kind in a way he never had before. It wasn't a complete transformation. Stanford still carried his prejudices. But something about watching Loretta's calm dignity on that flight, about seeing her rise to power and use it for good, had planted a small seed of change in him too. First Class Airways transformation became a case study in business schools. Customer complaints dropped 67% in the first 3 months. Service ratings increased from 3.2 out of 5 to 4.6. Revenue increased 23% as passengers who had previously avoided the airline began flying again, attracted by genuine commitment to equity rather than empty diversity statements. Other airlines scrambled to implement similar programs, not wanting to be left behind. The entire industry began to shift slowly but undeniably toward a model where discrimination was not just discouraged but actively rooted out. 6 months after that fateful flight, Loretta was invited to speak at the National Aviation Conference in Washington, D.C. She stood on stage before hundreds of airline executives, pilots, flight attendants, and industry analysts. The room was silent as she began to speak. I want to tell you a story about a flight I took 6 months ago. I boarded as an anonymous passenger, and I was questioned about my right to sit in first class. I was given inferior service compared to white passengers around me. I was mocked by crew members who assumed I didn't belong. And when I spoke up about this treatment, I was removed from my paid seat and banished to economy class as punishment for daring to expect dignity. She paused, letting the words sink in. I didn't reveal my identity during that flight because I wanted to experience what countless black passengers and passengers of color experience every day. Discrimination isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's a cold tone, a suspicious glance, a denied service that others receive freely. It's being made to feel like you don't belong even when you've paid the same price and deserve the same respect. Loretta's voice grew stronger. But here's what I learned. Change is possible. When we hold ourselves accountable, when we refuse to accept that's just how things are, when we build systems that value every human being equally, we don't just create better companies, we create a better world. To every person of color who has been made to feel less than you belong, your dignity is not negotiable. Your worth is not determined by others' prejudices. Speak up, document, demand better. And to everyone in positions of power, use it. Use it to lift others up, to dismantle systems of oppression, to create opportunities for those who've been denied them. You have a choice every single day to be part of the problem or part of the solution. The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. But Loretta wasn't thinking about the applause. She was thinking about the next flight she would take, about whether her changes had really worked, about whether passengers of color were finally receiving the treatment they deserved. The next morning, Loretta boarded a first-class Airways flight from D.C. back to Houston. She was in her full CEO regalia, this time her identity known to everyone. The flight attendant who greeted her was a black woman named Shanice, 34 years old, who had been promoted to purser after completing advanced service training. Good morning, Miss Washington. Welcome aboard. We're honored to have you flying with us today. Shanice's smile was genuine, her pride in her work evident. Loretta returned the smile, but shook her head gently. Thank you, Shanice. But today, I'm just another passenger. Treat me the same way you'd treat anyone else. Shanice understood immediately. Absolutely. With respect and excellence. That's our standard now. She moved down the aisle to greet other passengers with the same warmth and professionalism. Loretta settled into seat 1A and noticed the young black woman in seat 1B looking at her shyly.
Excuse me, aren't you Loretta Washington? I saw your speech online yesterday. It was incredible. Loretta turned to her with interest. Thank you. What's your name, Yolanda? I just got promoted to senior analyst at my consulting firm. I decided to treat myself to first class for the first time. Her voice held a note of uncertainty, as if she was still convincing herself she deserved to be here. Loretta felt a surge of emotion. Congratulations on your promotion. That's a wonderful achievement. Yolanda's eyes were bright. A year ago, I wouldn't have dared book first class. I would have felt like I didn't belong, like people would judge me or question whether I could afford it. But your story made me realize I've earned this. I belong here as much as anyone. Loretta reached over and squeezed Yolanda's hand. Yes, you do. And don't ever let anyone make you doubt that. You worked hard for your success. You have every right to enjoy it. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Shanice came by with the beverage service. She offered the full menu of options to both Loretta and Yolanda with equal warmth, bringing their drinks in proper glassware with perfect presentation. Later, when meal service began, she offered them both the full selection of entrees, taking time to describe each option with care. Loretta watched it all and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: hope. Not naive hope that pretended racism had been solved, but realistic hope that progress was possible, that systems could change, that people could learn and grow. The plane lifted off Houston, falling away beneath them. Loretta looked out at the clouds and thought about her journey. From a little girl in Southside Chicago who dreamed of flying to a woman who now ran an airline. From someone who had been told 1,000 times that she didn't belong to someone who had the power to decide what belonging meant. She thought about Ashton, Jolene, and Brock, whose careers had ended because they couldn't see past skin color. She thought about Kimberly, who had chosen growth over defensiveness. She thought about Geneva, who had lived 40 years of discrimination, but still had hope for change. She thought about Yolanda, who was just beginning her journey and deserved a world where she never had to question whether she belonged. And she thought about all the passengers she would never meet, who would fly first-class airways in the months and years to come and receive the service they deserved, not because of who they were, but because they were human beings worthy of respect. The flight attendant brought champagne. Loretta raised her glass toward Yolanda, to belonging, to dignity, to change. Yolanda smiled and touched her glass to Loretta's, to change. As they flew toward Houston, Loretta Washington knew that her work was far from over. There would be more resistance, more people who didn't want to change, more systems that needed dismantling. But she also knew that she had started something that couldn't be stopped, a movement toward equity that would ripple through the entire industry and beyond. Because sometimes the person you underestimate today will be the one who changes your world tomorrow. And Loretta Washington had changed hers. So, what did you think of this incredible journey of justice and transformation? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination like this? How do you think companies should handle employees who treat customers unfairly based on race? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I want to hear your perspective on this important issue. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the power of standing up for what's right, then show your support by hitting that like button. And if you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this that shine a light on real issues and real change. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you so much for watching, for caring, and for being part of a community that believes everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Until next time, remember your voice matters, your dignity is non-negotiable, and change is always possible when good people refuse to stay silent. Take care of yourselves and each other. This powerful story teaches us that discrimination often hides behind professional smiles and corporate policies. Loretta's experience reveals how racism in customer service isn't always loud or obvious. It manifests in cold tones, suspicious glances, denied services, and the assumption that people of color don't belong in premium spaces. The most important lesson is that silence enables injustice. When passengers like Stanford and Francine supported the crew's discriminatory behavior, they became part of the problem. Bystanders who witness unfair treatment but say nothing
allows systems of oppression to continue unchecked. We also learn that true leadership means using power to create systemic change, not just punishing individuals. Loretta didn't simply fire the crew members who mistreated her. She built training programs, established accountability measures, and created pathways for growth. She understood that lasting transformation requires changing hearts and minds, not just enforcing rules. Another crucial lesson is documentation. Loretta's careful recording of names, times, and specific incidents gave her the evidence needed to demand change. When facing discrimination, document everything because memories fade, but written records endure. Finally, this story reminds us that we should never underestimate anyone based on appearance. The person you dismiss today might be the one who shapes your tomorrow. Respect and dignity should be given freely to everyone, not reserved for those who prove they deserve it. What's your biggest takeaway from Loretta's story? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their race? How would you have handled the situation if you were in Loretta's position? Drop your answers in the comments below, because your voice and your experiences matter in this conversation. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment, regardless of skin color, show your support by smashing that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss powerful stories that challenge us to be better and do better. And please share this video with your friends, family, and coworkers because these conversations need to happen everywhere. Thank you for watching, for engaging, and for being part of a community that stands against injustice. Remember, change begins with awareness, grows through action, and succeeds when we refuse to stay silent. Keep fighting for what's right, keep treating people with dignity, and keep believing that a better world is possible. Until next time, take care and stand strong.